So today, guys, I'm going to be explaining the difference between battle IQ and regular IQ. Now, regular IQ is just a term I'm going to call it. I guess you can call it academic IQ because usually we just regularly call it like IQ, but when it comes to these versus battles, we have a different term with like battle IQ, and you sometimes hear this with other sports like basketball IQ or football IQ because when you play a different sport, it requires a different levels of intelligence for it. And the reason why I'm specifically making a video on this is because I did have a bit of a series on this where my first one was I think it was feats versus statements. Then my second one was lifting strength versus striking strength. Then it was combat speed versus travel speed, and I went in depth and explained the difference between those two because usually when people do these versus battles and they put two characters from different universes against each other, they go through many different things that they compare them with, strength, speed, durability, intelligence, and stuff like that. So we have arguments between those two things, but not those two things, but those things. And the problem with that is a lot of people have a lot of discourse between how we should determine those different specifics set power sets that we're looking at. For like example, speed. Usually when we see people talking about speed, they just talk about how fast a character can move, but then there's some people that disagree with it and say just because a character can move from one place to another super fast doesn't mean they can fight at that speed. So there's a little bit of a discourse when it comes to that discussion as a whole. And to be honest, I actually kind of forgot about this series a little bit. I was reminded by one of my subscribers actually. I forgot who it was, but they told me, "Are you going to make a video on this?" And I said, "Yeah, I should because I already did it on those other ones. Why not do it on this one?" Because I do think this is also pretty important. Now, compared to speed, arguing about what speed actually matters, combat speed or travel speed, or which type of strength matters, lifting strength or striking strength. Compared to those two, it is not as intense because people don't really have that much of a debate between battle IQ and regular IQ. But I have seen people misinterpret what it means to be intelligent in a battle or have a strategic mind in a fight, because a lot of people when they talk about intelligence of a character, they're not going in depth on their intelligence in a fight or fighting prowess, but mainly how smart they are due to their IQ score, or what degrees they have, or what fields that they have some form of expertise in. Like when you hear about Iron Man and stuff like that, you hear about like he has expertise in engineering and biology and this and that, whatever, and we talk about those things. And I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect when it comes to that in the case of these battles, because we have one side that's bringing up list of all their academic achievements, that like saying this character created this, he created that, this character was able to find this out, their IQ is this high up, they have a degree in this many different fields of science or whatever. And we see these and the arguments and the debates, which I feel like is pretty stupid to use in a debate, because just because a character is not naturally intelligent in other areas like in science doesn't mean they're going to be intelligent in a fight. And in this video I'm going to go in depth and explain why battle IQ and regular IQ are two different things. They can sometimes closely link. You don't have to be it doesn't have to be one or the other always, but for you to say that just because a character has a high IQ score or they're naturally intelligent, that means that they're going to be really intelligent in a fight and strategic, doesn't really make sense too much, especially as in a fight, not just a strategy in general. And then there's also the fact that there's even more in depth than that, because when it comes to intelligence, not only when it comes to compared to just regular intelligence, but intelligence in a fight, but there's also a difference between intelligence in a fight and intelligence in a war, because there's this combat or like warlike intelligence, and then there's more fighting like intelligence, where they both have strategy and that they implement in these fights and these battles. But a war is a far more bigger scaled battle with multiple people in it, whereas a fight usually it can be having multiple people, but it's usually one-on-one, and it's usually a back and forth between each other physically instead of attack formations or whatever. So I'll also get into that because I've seen people use that as arguments, saying these characters, they have they're very have strategic mind when it comes to battles and stuff like that. And I feel like it's not fair to compare that to combat, because hand-to-hand combat is different than battle scenarios. And any Marine that has been in the Marine and let's say they've done like boxing or MMA, knows that there's a significant difference between, the combat that you see and, the military compared to the combat that is in, fighting. There's two, they might seem similar, but there's two separate worlds. So yeah, let's get into it. Now, regular IQ, like I said, is mainly just the IQ score. It's by looking at, the knowledge that one person has in many different fields in science, math, and history or whatever. And these are just, subjects that these people are very well intelligent and versed in. So it's kind of like book smarts. Whereas, combat IQ, I don't think you really need to be intelligent to be a really great fighter. It can help, like let's say you're a doctor and you understand the human body. Understanding the human body a lot more will help you out in a fight because you would know what points to attack. But you wouldn't need to have some medical, degree to know how to do that as a fighter. As a fighter, you will be able to develop that as it goes through. But I feel like there's a big disconnect, like I said, because a lot of fans, I've seen them have these, battle scenarios between two characters, and they're like, well, this character was able to, create this or do that, and then they were able to do this. And I was like, well, that's not the same thing. Those are two different things. And the way I define, combat IQ is basically how strategic a person's mind is when it comes to fighting. For example, like how well are they able to analyze their opponent's weaknesses? How well are they able to exploit their weaknesses? How well are they able to, realize their own weaknesses and use that to their own advantage? How smart enough are they to, do countermeasures to the person? So it requires more when it comes to that, when it comes to just pure fighting, whereas the other one is different. And like I said, when it comes to intelligence, I think there was a book that came out years ago. I remember in 8th grade, our teacher talked about it. It was called like 7 different types of intelligence or smart or whatever, where it was basically talking about when people talk about intelligence, they usually focus mainly on, academic and curricular, intelligence. But there is more to it than just that. You can be a musical, I think it was talking about geniuses. It was like you can be a musical genius, you can be a history genius, you can be, an athletic genius. So being a genius or being smart, you can be smart in different areas. Even in the form of just education itself, there's different fields that you can be very educated in compared to somebody else. Whether it's history, whether it's literature, whether it's biology, chemistry, engineering. So each of those fields itself, will require a different level of intelligence for that. So just because one person is naturally smart in one area doesn't mean they're going to be smart in the other area either. And I think this is where the big difference between the combat and the regular IQ comes into play. Because in the regular IQ is mainly just focusing on, like I said, these subjects, whereas battling, it doesn't require you to have knowledge about history or any of that stuff. All it needs is you to understand somewhat of how the human body works and how to use that to your advantage to hurt the other person and take them out, or kill them or whatever in these battle scenarios. And it's also ridiculous to me that people say stuff like Tony Stark and this character are super smart. They're because we've seen sometimes Death Battle and stuff, they say like Lex Luthor is 12th level intellect and stuff like that, and it's like it doesn't matter because that doesn't help out in a fight. That intelligence can help out, but it doesn't necessarily need to be there to help out. That doesn't indicate that somebody is better going to be at a fight just because they have a high level of intelligence. That's just dumb. Perfect prime examples is when you go to anime. Look at Dragon Ball, look at Naruto, look at One Piece. One Piece, Dragon Ball, and Naruto, they have the main characters who are pretty stupid, especially earlier on in their story. Luffy, Naruto, especially earlier Naruto, and Goku, they're not very intelligent when it comes to education. They're not intelligent in general, but when it comes to fighting and their battle IQ, it is extraordinarily high. Even somebody like Goku, who has never had any formal education in school, he had basic learning of counting and math and reading from Master Roshi, but let's be honest, that's not enough. But even with that being said, when it comes to fighting, he's a genius. He knows so much. You have characters like Gohan, Piccolo, and Vegeta, who are naturally actually really smart, especially Piccolo and Gohan. They're really smart. Education wise, Gohan's very smart. But when you compare them to Goku, even though he's an idiot compared to them in every other aspect, when it comes to fighting, he's the genius. Yes, Piccolo and Vegeta are very strategic minds, but Goku's mind is just even on a higher level when it comes to fighting. And it was specifically proven when he was fighting against Hit the second time. even though it had some abilities that are very complex, even for us as fans, hearing it is complex. But Goku was just fighting him, and he was able to not only understand what his abilities were and how he was using them, but he was also able to understand how to do countermeasures for it and give himself the upper hand and beat him. I know a lot of people usually say that Dragon Ball characters mainly use a brute force, which is the case, but they also are very strategic in the way they fight, especially Goku. He's very an intelligent guy when it comes to fighting. And like I said, the second fight against Hit definitely proved that. So when we look at it, it kind of doesn't really make much sense to be like, well, this character has this high level of an intellect, so that means they win in the IQ department. But then we're like, you look at Luffy or Naruto or Goku, they're not very smart education wise, but when you put them in a fight, they're very intelligent. So clearly it doesn't really matter about your regular intelligence when it comes to a combat situation, because if that was the case, Goku would be terrible when it comes to combat strategies. And then also, like I said, strategies, there's different things to that, because I've seen people say, well, this character has been established a lot longer than that character, and they fought more battles and they've stopped people and their plans and stuff like that, whereas this character fought less. But people need to realize the fact that it depends on what the scenario is. The scenario and the context is always very important. So like when we go through these characters stopping somebody's plan, like let's say in comics, usually the comic book villains that are causing havoc, they're not just doing purely through physical means, they also have a plan in the background which needs to be stopped. Like they're doing something sneaky, and you have the heroes themselves finding a strategic way to find out what they're doing and stop that. They're not usually just pure like physically brawling. But then we have other series, like I said, Dragon Ball, where they do have some additional planning, but usually the strategy that they need is in the fight itself on how to overcome them in the fight. Whereas usually in comic books, it's not just simple as beating the person. They have like a plan that they orchestrated that you have to stop, or something bad is going to happen. Whereas like I said, in Dragon Ball, when you see strategy, it's mainly combat strategy. Whereas you see in comics and stuff, it can be some combat strategy, but most of the time the strategy is used up on stopping their big plan, not trying to beat them in the fight. So that's where I think people need to understand the difference, because I've seen people say, well, this character has had more fights throughout their career, they have more experience. I guess also you can put experience for like combat IQ, because it will raise it up. The more experience is just basically learning through trials and tribulations. So it's more of an extreme version of learning through life, or whatever situation or scenario you're trying to go through. But like I said, a lot of people bring those arguments up, saying that they have had more fights, more experience, and they stopped a bunch of plans and they were able to strategize and stuff like that. But that doesn't really matter if that plan that they were doing had nothing to do with the fight. Because if they're planning on how to beat somebody in a fight, that's one thing. But if their plan is to cause chaos and havoc, or do some sneaky thing to give them the win, then the other person having a strategy to beat that doesn't really, contest to fighting. Because like if I'm fighting somebody, my strategy would be solely on how to approach this person in the fight, how to beat them, how to analyze what they're doing, how to notice what are my weaknesses, and how to avoid those weaknesses getting exploited, and using my strengths as best as possible to give me insurance of the victory itself. So that strategy in my mind is just focusing on that. Whereas the other strategy, the focus is on not solely on just fighting the person, but trying to stop whatever they're planning itself. So that is different. So when people see people say this, that they had strategy to beat that, I'm like, did they use that strategy in a fight against that person or against their plan? Because that's two solely different things. And that's why also, like I said, like battle or war, I guess you could say IQ is different than combat, because combat is basically hand-to-hand fighting, whereas a war could be multiple people, it's two sides fighting. It could be hands, it could be energy attacks, it can be weapons, whatever. It's a whole thing. And the reason why I'm talking about this is I remember when I did on Seth's video about Batman versus Goku, who would be who's the better martial artist and who would win in a fight, just purely hands. He mentioned the fact that Batman was able to surpass Wonder Woman, who was able to surpass I think it was Ares. He was able to surpass Ares, who's the god of war, and he knows all battle battle strategies throughout all of time itself. And I mentioned in that video that is not the same thing, because what Ares uses uses, his battle intelligence and his strategy is mainly for a war. It's not a fight. A fight and a war are two different things. If you have like a military person going from a war to martial arts and hand-to-hand combat like MMA or boxing or Muay Thai, they will tell you that those are not the same things at all. The strategy, the way you approach it is completely different. Just like I said, the same thing with academics, though that one's more of a distinguishing difference, because one, it's about a certain field of subject that you learn, and the other one is just purely about fighting. So you could be like, just because a character knows a ton about science, how is that going to help them out in a fight? Because let's be honest, in real life, there's people who are very intelligent, but when you look at a lot of fighters are not that intelligent. You don't need to be a genius to be a fighter, but you do need to be a fighting genius to be a really great fighter. So we see a lot of regular smart people. By that logic of we're just going based off of their regular intelligence, wouldn't that mean that regular smart people like scientists, wouldn't they be great at fighting? Wouldn't they know how to fight very well, or at least understand the art of fighting very well? Especially compared to the martial artists? No, it's just not realistic, because though they have a high level of intelligence, they have it in specific fields and specific things, and the things that they use it on are mainly more for just broad views, stuff, just understanding science and stuff like that, whereas this is specifically about fighting itself. And like I said, when you look at martial artists, when you look at boxers, MMA fighters, all these guys, some of them can be intelligent, but a lot of them, no offense to them, are not very intelligent. A lot of them are just meatheads or whatever. But the fact that even though in real life that they're not, or the regular world, they might not be that intelligent, when it comes to fighting, they're definitely the top tier intellectuals when it comes to that, and they have definitely expertise in that. So looking at through the realistic lens, you really don't need to have a high level of intelligence to be very intelligent fighter, and you don't need to be being dumb doesn't mean that you're going to be a dumb fighter. A lot of people that aren't very intelligent in real life are really good fighters, and those two things are not very synonymous. So I think we do need to differentiate between those two and separate them. Now they can work regular intelligence, like let's say we have two characters who use tech or use science in a fight, so they use their scientific minds and abilities for that, instead of like characters that just use their hands into hand-to-hand combat. So like let's say for example Lex Luthor versus Iron Man, these guys use tech, these guys use chemistry, they use other stuff. They do not use just hand-to-hand fighting scenarios. So most of their IQ, it makes sense if you were to use just their IQ score. It would make sense if you're using how many fields they have degrees in, or how intelligent they are in these different fields, and how strategic they are in that, because then that intelligence is specifically used in their fight because they use the tech. Whereas when it comes to superpowered beings, most of them, they're using their own power, so they don't really need tech, so they don't need scientific knowledge. Some scientific knowledge would be fine, because let's say like I said, with Hit's ability, it does require you to have some scientific understanding. But then again, when you think about it, Goku does not understand shit about science. You think he understands the complexity of Hit's abilities? Most people that watched what happened didn't even understand how Hit's abilities worked. But Goku was able to find out while he was fighting, even though I highly doubt he understands the inner mechanisms of what he was doing and the science behind it. He just knew how to fight against it, and he knew how to build a strategy against that. And like I said, if we want to use a character's IQ, let's say if you want to use their combat IQ for fighting, because the most important thing when we're doing this is talking about who's more intelligent or more strategic, and easier, better at analyzing their opponent when it comes to a fight. Now when it comes to thwarting somebody's plan, now when it comes to being in a big war battle scenario, but just in a fight in general, who has the better intelligence and combat IQ, which like I said are two different things. And how do you determine a character's combat IQ? How can you find that? Well, if you're going to use strategy, use their strategy when it comes to fighting an opponent. So there's many different ways you can look through this. You could have it where you could be like, this character is fighting against opponents that were way more powerful than them, but they were able to outsmart them and beat them through their own intelligence. That would showcase that even though they're in a disadvantage when it comes to power, with their battle IQ, that could give them a significant boost and advantage against them, showcasing that they can rely on their own intelligence to surpass even opponents that are stronger than them. So what should we look at? we should look at basically techniques and combat in general. So we should look at a few things. How many techniques do they know? What type of techniques do they know? How many types of martial arts do they know? What specific type of martial arts do they know? Because just because a character knows a ton of martial arts doesn't matter if they're using a bunch of useless martial arts. How they're able to analyze their opponent, how well they're able to, how well are they able to exploit their strengths and be able to, protect their weaknesses, because everybody has like a weakness. Like some characters might be slower, some characters might be less durable, whatever. But how are they able to use their intelligence to compensate for that lack of ability in those any specific area, So those are what you should look at. So what we should look at if we're going to be looking at these intelligence, because I've had some disagreements with people back and forth with this discussion. So for me personally, the best way to look at it is not to look at just who's been fighting longer and who has more experience, who has fought more crazier, wilder enemies. What really matters is who has fought. It does matter to have more, but here's the thing: the saying goes as quality over quantity. So just because a character has more quantity, more fights, more experience, does not mean just in battle scenarios in general, does not mean they have more experience or more knowledge when it comes to just regularly fighting or when it comes to martial arts in general. When it comes to that, quality matters more. Quantity is still important, but quality matters more. So it depends on how many fights these characters have had, how many opponents have they battled, but also the skill level of the opponents they fought. If they're fighting against just an opponent that's very powerful but has no combat skills to them, then that doesn't matter if they beat them, because you could just say, well, they beat them through sheer power. Because look at it, the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk has had countless fights, but a lot of his opponents that he fights, not all, but a lot of the opponents that he fights don't really have martial arts skills. They're just very big, powerful brutes. So when the Hulk beats them, it doesn't mean that he's a better fighter, a better martial artist. All that means is that he's fought more fights, but those more fights were on lower levels. So and this is a term that you see also in real martial arts in general that has been talked about quite a bit back and forth between people, and that's if you know anything about martial arts, you see boxers or MMA fighters, especially boxers nowadays, where they have big records, where they're undefeated streaks and they have impressive records and knockout ratios and stuff like that. And the average fighting fan will be like, oh, they look impressive, but the more hardcore or more well veteran fan of fighting would know that doesn't matter as depending on who they fought, because a lot of times when these boxers or these fighters have these big records, their records, this is a term that usually gets thrown around, they have a padded record, basically meaning that they fight a kind of like weak or fodder characters, or not characters, but weak or fodder people, like people that are not as physically I guess you could say high level or intelligent when it comes to fighting in general. So that doesn't really matter. Even in a real fight, when we look at it, just because somebody has had more fights doesn't mean anything. If they fought a bunch of nobodies who have no real skill, it doesn't matter if they beat like 2 or 3 times more people than the other person, if that other person has fought more skilled, more dangerous, and more physically capable opponents. So that's what really matters. Like I said, quality over quantity. So just because a character has more, battles and has been around fighting longer and more crazy things, doesn't mean that they're going to be better in a fight against, another person who has great, fighting skills, because it really matters about who they fought and what skill level were the person they fought. So you see a lot of the people saying, well, this character fought a bunch of people, but let's look at it. One, a lot of the characters they might have fought have been way weaker than them, so these characters are holding back. So if they're fighting against a lot of opponents that are weaker than them, that they have to hold back, that wouldn't really mean anything then, because they were never really any threat. They were the threat themselves, and they were holding themselves back from harming them. So they couldn't have been really challenged or pushed. And that's what really matters, is fighting against opponents that challenge and push them physically and combat wise, but them being able to surpass them will showcase how good of a fighter they are. So there's many different components and factors that you have to take into consideration when it comes to these two characters fighting. You can't just say, well, this character has fought more opponents and they've had more experience in this and that, and just be like, well, they fought more, so that means that they have more experience, so they're a better fighter than the other person. It really matters about a couple of key different things. So let's go through all the different things that a character would need or require to have a higher battle IQ. One, their opponents that they fight against mostly have to be, an actual physical challenge or a threat, because if the character is holding back against the person and most of their enemies are weaker than them, but they have a couple of stronger enemies, then that doesn't really matter. For like example, Superman, most of Superman's enemies are not really on his level. He has a couple that are, but majority of the times when he fights, he's not fighting against characters that are on his level. Same thing with the Flash. Most of his rogues gallery or the people he fights are not on his level. He has a few, and those are the more top tier guys, like the other speedsters and stuff that he deals with. But he normally, most of his issues in the comic books that you see him fighting, it's more against his regular rogues gallery, which that are not on his level. So that really doesn't count as much, because in a fight it really depends on for the character's intelligence. When it comes to fighting, it really matters about them being put in challenging situations and fighting in adversary be fighting in challenging situations and fighting against an opponent who's able to push them. Because if they're fighting against most of the time they're fighting against characters that are not on their level and they're way weaker than them, then it doesn't really matter, because obviously they're going to beat them. They can easily just overpower them. They don't need to be strategic. What's the point of using strategy if you can one-shot your opponent easily? So that doesn't really count. So it really matters about how strong they are. And the problem with a lot of characters, especially comic book characters, majority of the times when they're fighting against just regular weaker characters who are not on their level. And the characters that are on their level, they do fight against them quite a bit, but that's only once in a while compared to those other ones. So like I said, it depends on how strong they are, because they need to be challenged to push the character to make them more impressive. Because if they're very powerful, like let's say the character is even more powerful than them and they're able to still beat them, that showcases that they have such a great strategic mind that they can beat opponents stronger than them. But being an opponent weaker than you doesn't really mean anything. And then second, how skilled of a fighter they are. They might be very powerful, but a lot of characters that are usually very super powerful aren't really that great of a fighters, and they solely rely on brute force and physical strength. So it does really matter about how strong they are, but also can they fight. So they need to also be just as good, much of a challenge when it comes to their actual fighting capabilities as their regular power itself. Because then you could just say, well, they're more powerful and they just solely rely on their power, so it's easy to strategize and beat them. Then another thing is, when we're talking about using strategies or beating their plan, we need to talk about what is their plan, because some of these plots are basically to destroy a city or to destroy this or to capture somebody or to take something or do that, but that doesn't really matter in a fight, because when we're using fights, you can't be saying, well, this character was able to had strategic mind and was able to stop their plan. The plan had nothing to do with the fight itself. It led into the fight, but it wasn't, fighting itself that they were able to beat them. Then after that would be, how well are they able to, analyze their opponents and how fast. So we will have characters against opponents who are either very powerful or have, hacks abilities or just really good at fighting. And there's a back and forth between those two characters, right? Now, for that character to showcase how smart they are, they would be able to surpass and beat their opponent even if they have a high hacks ability, really good fighters, or really good, very powerful. So especially if they have all three of those things and the character can beat them, that showcases that they're so intelligent that they can beat an opponent stronger than them with crazy hacks abilities and even great fighting skills in general. They can beat them, just making them sound even more impressive. So it also does matter about analyzing the character being able to analyze their opponents. Also, how fast they're able to analyze them. Because some characters, they're fighting against an opponent and it takes them forever to, read their movements and be able to find a countermeasure, whereas other characters, they can do a lot faster. So the character who can analyze their opponent faster will have the advantage, because if a fight goes on, one character will need the fight to prolong longer for them to have a better understanding of the person's abilities and how to, beat them. Whereas the other one, if they're faster, they would already found a way to beat that person right away and then be able to beat them right then and there, making it pointless for them to go on. So it also, like I said, depends on, how well they're able to analyze their opponents, or have they shown the ability to analyze opponents in fights, and then the speed of which they're able to do this. And the slower they are, the worse it's going to be for them in this, these battle scenarios. And then I guess you could say, well, how many martial arts styles do they know? How many martial arts skills and techniques do they know? But not only how many martial arts styles and skills and techniques do they know, but how many martial arts styles, skills, and techniques do they know that are useful? So like I explained in the video where I was talking about Seth's video talking about Goku versus Batman when it comes to martial arts, I mentioned the fact that though Batman knows more martial arts, the fact is that a lot of the martial arts he knows is kind of pointless. And it's just a reality. A lot of martial arts and techniques that people might learn do not really work. Like there's katas that people teach in like karate and stuff like that, and they don't, you can't really use them. So it also matters about, not just the quantity of martial arts skills or techniques or styles they have, but which ones they are using. I know I'm explaining a little bad, but what I'm trying to say is basically martial arts styles that actually work. Not just any martial arts styles, because there's a ton that don't wear like Aikido or Taekwondo. So that really doesn't matter. So it really matters about, the specific martial arts style that they've, trained in, and the techniques that they've learned and picked up on top of that. It also depends on how they apply that in the fight. Also, another thing that showcases how great of a fighter somebody is how they're able to use their entire body. Not just their hands, not just their feet, but their entire body. How they're, knowing how to throw multiple different types of punches, kicks, elbows, knees, headbutts, submission moves, grappling, any of those things, tosses, those all count into the, combat IQ category, because the more they know that, the more lethal they're going to be, and the more they're going to be able to, implement that in a strategic fight against their opponent in general. But the martial arts aspect, the fighting aspect, is the most important part to play when it comes to combat IQ, because we're really talking about who's more of a better hand-to-hand fighter, and the better martial artist is going to be the better strategist also on top of that. So that really matters. But yeah, there's many different things that you can go into, like I said, when it comes to combat intelligence. It's not just as simple as this character knows this much, this character invented this or that, this character's IQ is this high, this character has expertise in this many fields. Also, when it comes to the martial arts aspect, it depends on how much mastery do they have of that. Because just because a character knows some fighting from different martial arts styles doesn't mean that they mastered it or know it fully. And that does really matter, because let's say if I'm doing MMA and mainly I know wrestling and kickboxing, I could have knowledge in other forms of martial arts like judo, boxing, Muay Thai, or whatever. I could have in all these other different fields, but I might just have a little bit of knowledge from those. So it also depends on how well they master them. So it really depends on not only the amount of martial arts fighting styles, but the amount of techniques, but the amount of martial arts fighting styles and techniques that would actually work, and then also on top of it, the level of mastery they have on each of them. Like, let's say if they mastered, let's say one character has many different fighting styles that they know how to do, but they only have a bit of expertise in all of them. Whereas another character has a couple of fighting styles, like 3 or 4, but they have mastery, full mastery of those all. That person is going to win, even though they have less martial arts fighting styles. Even if the guy has like legit martial arts fighting styles that he knows, the fact that that character only knows a bit of it is not going to be a significant enough of an advantage compared to the person who has mastered those select few. So it really, like I said, quality over quantity. So you can have more martial arts in your background, but if you haven't mastered it or or the character hasn't mastered it or fully understands it, it's not going to really help out as much. So yeah, like I said, if you guys are going to use these scenarios of who's going to win in a fight, really look into all these things into consideration. And I'll go repeat it again. If you're gonna be looking at how many fights, look at who they were fighting. Were their opponents weaker than them, so they had to hold back, so they were never really challenged? If that's the case, then that's not as impressive. Were the opponents that they're fighting, even if they were stronger than them, did they have martial arts, background, or did they know anything about fighting? If not, that will still be impressive to beat an opponent stronger than you, but not as impressive as a character who can beat an opponent who's on their level or stronger than them, but also is really good at fighting. So that also matters. Then you need to also take in consideration when it comes to strategy, is it a plan that they're enacting in general, or is the plan just in fighting that matters? Also, how many martial arts styles, techniques, the most like legitimate fighting styles, and then the mastery in those. How how well are they able to analyze opponents, especially opponents with more difficult abilities and harder to beat, and also how fast can they analyze their weaknesses and use it. How can they how well do they use their strengths to their advantages, and how well are they able to even if they have weaknesses, protect themselves from having their weaknesses be exploited and used. So there's many different things. So if I'm looking at it, I'm just going to be really looking at mostly their opponents that they fought. So I'm like this. Like, let's say I'm going to be talking with them. I'm gonna be like, this character fought this, and this character, and all these characters had expertise in martial arts and fighting. They've had multiple fights under their belt. They've had expertise in this martial arts and that martial arts, and these characters that this character fought against were also powerful. These characters pushed them past their limit physically and had great martial arts fighting skills because they beat other very skilled characters, but they still lost. That'll showcase how higher their battle IQ is. So yeah, like I said, in general, you don't need to be intelligent to have high battle IQ, because if that was the case, then most anime characters, they wouldn't be really good fighters like Goku or Naruto or Luffy, because in general they're pretty stupid, but when it comes to fighting, they're intelligent. And then there's characters that are intelligent, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be good at fighting and stuff. Unless, like I said, specifically, these characters are using equipment, like tech, or using some chemical stuff. So then it will require just broad intelligence in general. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for next time.